It's really only important if anyone else is home.
Oh, okay. Can I skip?
Yeah, I think so. As
Okay. All right, great.
long as you can hear it.
I can, but I thought it was cutting out.
I don't think so. We'll find out. We are live here. It is Friday, June 27th, 2025. This is the American Prospects Weekly Roundup. We do this every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. I'm David Dayen, executive editor. I'm here in DC with a brick wall behind me at the Prospect offices. And I've been in DC and before that, New York all week. So these are kind of the centers of the political universe. And with me, speaking of DC from Brooklyn, is our staff writer, Whitney Wimbish. Whitney, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on today. The energy in New York is still pretty high after the big win. And so I am really looking forward to seeing if that can sustain. And I'm really not looking forward to all of the just bonkers level racism we're about to see from everybody
Already have seen in some
in the
ways, right?
mainstream
Well,
press,
let's talk about
mainstream
that. Let's back
Democrats.
up. Let's back up a little bit and talk about it. So, yeah, obviously, what happened on Tuesday, Zoran Mandani, the assembly member from, I believe, the Astoria area, he won outright a plurality of votes in the New York City Democratic primary for mayor, beating the governor for 10 years, Andrew Cuomo, who was an overwhelming favorite when Mandani announced his run. I think he was at 1% in the polls. He got 43%. It's an absolutely remarkable realigning moment potentially in Democratic politics. And we were fortunate, Whitney, you started with us just a month ago, but we were fortunate that you're where you are in the New York City area because you covered this race pretty closely, including covering, a lot of the work that was happening on the ground. So maybe we can start with that. Talk about your experience uh, with the thousands of canvassers, people who were going door to door, talking to as many people as possible about Zoran.
I think what struck me the most about the canvassers and the Canvas campaign was that it really drew people from all walks of life. I saw people who were completely new to politics, who were still in
Mm-hmm.
college, um, through to people who were no longer working because they were retired. And another thing that struck me from the group is that among the people who've already seen a lot of elections come and go, who are familiar with other progressive hopefuls, um, they seem to have less cynicism about Zoran than they might be expected to after sort of, being crushed by not just Republicans, but also mainstream Democrats. So there is something about Zoran's focus on policy and his willingness to kind of speak to people like they're intelligent adults who can understand policy and understand their own material conditions that I think really connected with all walks of life. Um, the two canvassers who I tagged along with on a really hot evening had the similar kind of response from almost every single person they spoke with, even people who weren't going to rank Zoran number one, um, stepped out into the hallway to have a pretty substantive conversation. And the canvasser who was leading the team of two, it was someone who had done some 30 plus canvas campaigns, who's in his 40s, and someone who had never campaigned before. That day was his first day.
Mm-hmm.
um, they really took a lot of time with each person and didn't try to convince them that Zoran was right for them to vote for, but encouraged them to think about, you know, um, the policies that they want to see enacted in New York,
Yeah.
which is a really frustrating thing to think about when you are thinking about politicians, because they focus so frequently on the method of getting their message out and not on their actual method or the actual policies they want to enact. There's
Right.
such a allergic reaction among mainstream Democrats to talk about policy, and it is, I think people are really annoyed by that, and I think they are hungry for somebody who wants to talk about ways to
Sure.
organize society.
Well, that's fascinating. And I think the method that you're talking about by which canvassers were engaging in deep conversation with voters is an outgrowth of the candidate himself. You know, when Mandani started in this race, I believe it was last November, one of the first things that I saw that he was doing was he was just going out on the street and talking to voters, many of whom had voted for Donald Trump in the 2024 election. And instead of, kind of trying to engage in a debate with them, he just asked them why. And he got some really interesting responses, and they kind of tied in to his overall message, which was super focused on affordability. And most of the messages he got from Trump voters was that the city is just an impossible place to live in, and Democrats hadn't been focusing on that. And so his project was to take this raw material that he was being told by constituents and mold it into a policy framework that was intelligible, that respected people, and that spoke to their actual needs. And so, I see that filter down into what you're talking about with respect to the canvassers, but the tone was set at the top.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
I saw that through his entire staff as well. There was so much kind of rhetoric around like, oh, this is just this young guy and he's totally new, has no experience. But when I went to cover the event that he did with Zephyr Teachout and Lena Khan,
Mm-hmm.
I found the staff to be extraordinarily professional and very savvy. And and I was a page in the U.S. Senate
Oh, I
way
didn't know
back
that.
under the Clinton administration. And
Uh-huh.
um, you know, staff members don't have to be like that. They don't, it's not
Mm-hmm.
a given that staff of a politician will be like very, very savvy, but these guys are. And in a very heated moment when some protesters were interrupting the event to
Mm-hmm.
call for more action around Palestine, it was remarkable how restrained Zoran was on stage. He let everyone say their piece. The
Right.
the staff and the security guards did not manhandle people out of the room like we've seen over and over again across
Right.
the country. Um, and and he spoke to their concerns directly. Um,
Right.
and then afterwards, the protesters remained and protested staff and people leaving the event.
Mm-hmm.
And a woman walked by, an older woman walked by, and she pulled me aside and said, "Oh, who's speaking in there? He must be very pro-Israel." And I said, "Oh, it's Zoran Mamdani. He's the
Right.
candidate for mayor." And she said, "Oh, well, this is a great sign for me because I'm really pro-Israel." And one of
Right.
the campaign staffers walked by and she started talking to him. And he listened to her for a minute talk about how much she liked Israel.
Right.
Then he quickly turned the conversation into, how long have you lived in New York? What do you think about the prices here? And
Right.
and they had a substantial conversation on the side of the street. This person who had never heard of Zoran before,
The
who
very top down in terms of the mode of communication, and sort of being able to talk to people you don't agree with, being
absolutely.
able to respect people for the views that they have, and trying to say, there's an old, I saw this quoted somewhere. There's an old Ed Koch saying, like, if you agree with me on 9 of the 12 issues, vote for me.
Mhm.
If you agree with me on 12 of the 12 issues, get yourself committed.
And
because
that's a line
nobody
that
agrees with someone on everything, you
and that's
know?
something that Mamdani himself brought up and used as a quote during the debates, and
Well, there
has
you go.
said
Maybe
repeatedly.
that's where I saw it. Yeah.
It's I think people are really connecting with him, and it'll be interesting to see if that remains in the face of this avalanche of
Yeah,
racist
and
disagree
I want to totally get into that, but I want to talk about because you mentioned this anti-monopoly event that he held with Lena Khan and Zephyr Teachout, and on the podcast I do, Organized Money, we actually had Zephyr on this week, and we talked to her about much of this, but I want to bring it here. Not many mayors have an anti-monopoly platform, but Zoran did. One of the big things was banning of non-compete agreements, which are these agreements that say that wherever you're working, you can't work within the same field for X amount of time if you leave the job. So this is just mainly a wage suppression tool because it's been used in a variety of contexts, not just things that have intellectual property behind it, but janitors and fast food clerks and all of these different jobs now have non-compete agreements tied to them. And so for a mayor to say, yeah, or a mayoral candidate to say, yeah, this is actually important, and it's harming the economic liberties of our people and not allowing them to distribute their talents across the entire landscape, and also allowing them to earn more money and thrive. That is, I think, it's a window into what he was talking about. And one other thing on that, Maureen Tkachuk, is our investigative editor. She has a term that she uses to describe Zoran Mandani, and that is small business socialist.
Mhm.
So if you think about like one of the most popular videos that he did, and obviously his communication style, being able to attract people, not just through obviously going out and talking to voters, which he did in ways that I don't think we've seen in municipal politics for a long time. He walked the length of Manhattan the weekend before the vote, right? But he also did these short videos, and they many of them went viral. And he tapped into a mode of communication. He was almost doing like more perfect union type short videos, and one of them is about halal carts.
Mhm.
And he's talking about why halal food is getting more expensive. But what he's really talking about is the struggles of small businessmen to be able to navigate the bureaucracy in New York City, and how because they can't, because they have to, in order to get a license to be on the street in New York, they have to pay someone who already has a license because it's impossible for the city to distribute them. There's a waiting list that's years long. And so they pay this premium to people who already have licenses. And that's why your halal is $10 instead of $8. That's why
Mhm.
your chicken over rice is $10 instead of $8. And so it's really a story about affordability, but it's smuggling in also a story about, you know, protecting and helping small business thrive.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting how he fused those two different things together.
Mhm. I think one of the things for people who, might not be economists or might not be
Yeah,
kind of watching how economic policy is affecting them that closely. They just have sort of a sense that everything is more expensive and it's really hard to get things done.
that's
And
right.
I think having events like the one he had about anti-monopoly, having videos explaining why your chicken over rice is more expensive, I think is kind of demystifying
Mhm.
some of these economic issues that everybody all over town, everywhere in the US feels on a personal level, but might not have the language to talk about it and might not have specific examples. And that's something that Democrats have not been great at, but Republicans are good at. Those
Yeah,
guys have very good talking points, and people who like to get into debate, kind of memorize them and they have them at the ready. So
right.
that if you have a conversation with them, it's very hard to kind of, combat what they're saying. Um,
Absolutely.
And this is, I think, sort of the answer to that, or an answer to that for progressives.
100%. It breaks down these airy concepts
Mhm.
into something that is that everybody can understand,
The other
and
thing it
it
does,
repeats them. Yeah, go ahead.
it repeats them. And the other thing it does, I think, is it illustrates how it is happening to everyone, that you're not alone. And I
You're not
think
alone,
that
right?
one of the really um, powerful things that financial actors do is to reframe how we think about money and how we think about the way money is spent to
Hmm.
it just kind of focuses it right down to you. So everything is your fault. If you're poor, it's your fault. If you don't understand how to sign up for insurance, it's your fault. Here, we've
Right.
done this financial literacy thing online and you didn't go to it. So that's your fault. And, there are all of these things
Right.
that kind of lead people to believe that their financial situation is just a result of their personal decisions and not the
Right.
result of this massive, powerful superstructure that is oppressing them.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I want to say about this, and then we'll get into, the road ahead for Zoran, which, is going to be really interesting, is, um, the cross endorsement. And maybe this is part of the fact that you had ranked choice voting in New York City, and so it emphasized collaboration and also like optimism. Like if you're running an entirely negatively polarized race, you're not going to build the kind of alliances that you're going to need to build to make sure that you're ranked on those ballots too, right? One of the things that's I think great about Mandani as a communicator is that he's very optimistic. But this cross endorsement with Brad Lander, who I'm here in DC, and in the immediate aftermath of this win, I've been running around and doing a lot of reporting, and people know Lander. Like they don't know Mamdani as much. I mean, in a personal sense, I'm talking about members of Congress, things like that. They know him through various progressive networks, and they trust him. And they're just, there's like this twinge of guardedness about Mamdani because they just don't know him. And so Lander, I think Lander and Mamdani represent two different strains of progressive thought and sort of ideas about how to win elections and win power that have been brought together, uh, not just by the endorsement, but by both of their own mentality. You have the sort of, well, what you have to do is inspire people. You have to be a great orator, and you have to campaign well, and you have to give people a reason to want to come out to the polls, and that will increase turnout from your base. There's that kind of theory of politics, right? And then there's a theory of politics that says, well, actually, what you have to do is you have to get things done, and you have to, once you're in office, you got to make promises that you're able to keep, and then you have to keep those promises, and that's going to maintain the trust that people have in you that they don't have in a lot of Democrats right now, because a lot of these promises have historically been broken.
Mhm.
And Lander and Mandani together, they bring those two different strands and theories of politics into one. And my understanding is that Lander is going to be, if Mamdani wins, the deputy mayor, and that he will be tasked with turning many of these ideas that we've heard about, freezing the rent and uh, 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 you know grocery store pilot, free childcare, these kinds of things. He would be tasked with bringing them into reality and using his knowledge and skills from a career in politics to implement these things. And Mamdani is very, very clear on this point that I can say, I can come up with 8 great slogans for why I need to be your mayor, but if I don't do any of them, you're going to turn on me. And he's been very candid about this. And so he recognizes, okay, now we have to go to work, and now we have to get this done. And that's, I think bringing those two things together, which, I mean, if you want to overly simplify it, it's the Warren wing and the Sanders wing, right? And bringing those together, which is probably where they should have been all along, and it's like a tragedy that they weren't, is a really good sign, I think, for progressive politics generally in America.
Totally. And I think that, the people who, the canvassers I shadowed talked to who talked about this really emphasized that, they were voting for something for the first time in a
Right.
really long time. And they liked the cross endorsement, they liked the messages, they liked Brad Lander's
Mm-hmm.
commitment to standing up for people who are being absolutely abused in this country. Um, all of that was really positive, and I think that folks are feeling so grim and so just aghast by ICE agents, tearing families apart and disappearing people in, masks. They're aghast by the Supreme Court, and it's like this little bright spot of good news for
Right.
once. Um,
And by the way, uh, obviously Mandani laser focused on affordability. That was the number one, two, and three priorities of his mayoral campaign. But he really started to take off when he confronted Tom Homan.
mhm.
This was in like January when Homan was in New York. And, there was there's this idea mainly from like the centrist welcome fest people that you have to go out of your way to push, people with interests in social issues or whatever to the back of the line. Like you have to have a sister soldier moment, which is, this thing that Clinton did denouncing a black rapper in 1992. That you have to do that. You have to actually stand up and visibly defy the left. And that is the way that you get credibility in politics. And what Mandami has done is he has his priorities, but nobody is disinvited from the table, right? Everybody is included and is part of the coalition and is working toward this brighter future. And I think that's a really important kind of point. That yes, was it about affordability? Yes, but it was also about recognizing people's common humanity and the ability for them to thrive.
Absolutely. And I also think to your point about confronting Tom Homan, people are hungry for someone to stand up um, against these absolute bullies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, seeing Brad Lander do the same gave people a little hope that there's,
Right,
some fight left in
right.
the country for something that's good and not,
So this
to keep everybody down.
absolutely. So this is kind of the feelings among Mandani supporters, right? Now there's the other side of this, which is the elites. Or did
Oh,
you
but
want
wait,
something
I
else?
did have a question for
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
I am curious about what you think or how you think it will play out, uh, Mamdani's goal of taxing the rich, given that, you know, mayors don't determine taxes. That's the governor's job, and Kathy Hochul has said she's not into it.
Right. I mean, at least in New York, the if certain fiscal policies want to be carried out by a governor or a mayor, they need sign off from the governor, and so that this is going to be a big issue for Mamdani if he wins. And I think the freak out on among the elites of New York City should recognize this that it's going to be a tall task. I think that what he's going to have to do is use his prodigious communication skills and the kind of grassroots army that he has behind him to highlight the forces of obstruction, and that's really going to be the only way is to through persuasion try to get a change here. Ultimately, these are small amounts. I mean, if you want to do the grocery store pilot, it really isn't a lot of money. If you want to do free buses, it really isn't a whole lot of money. He can do freezing the rent by himself. That's an authority that mayors have taken many times over the years. And with respect to the other ones, there are other opportunities. But yeah, I mean, Hochul. And maybe this is a good segue because Hochul, along with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, have said sort of blandly nice words about Zoran Mamdani, but have not sort of put their names on the dotted line to endorse him.
Mhm.
There have been other, there's this one member of Congress, Laura Gillen, who's out in Long Island, who basically made a statement of firm opposition to Mamdani. And then you have the freak out from the elites who, live in the pencil skyscrapers in Manhattan, who held like a 2 o'clock the day after the election phone call to discuss the Zoran situation, which sounds like a movie, kind of the Zoran situation, right? And now and you're kind of in the midst of reporting on this, but it seems like they're ping-ponging back and forth between a bunch of different options for how to deal with the aftermath, because there is a general election, and maybe you could talk about, what the options are there.
The options, do you mean the options among the anti-Zoran
Yeah,
crowd?
like what are they going to do? Like what
I,
could they possibly do?
oh, they could throw a bunch of money at the problem, which is what they tried the first time
Toward whom?
around. Pardon?
Toward whom?
Oh, to Cuomo, because he has decided to run as an independent.
Right.
Um, and I think that, there already is
As has Eric Adams, right?
as has Eric Adams.
Eric
Yeah,
Adams, the
it's
current
two.
mayor, has an independent ballot line. So there could be a four-way race here, and it likely is a four-way race between the Democrat, Mamdani, Adams, Cuomo as independents, and the Republican, Curtis Sliwa.
Mhm.
It seems to me that I don't see a whole lot of qualitative difference between Adams, Cuomo, and Sliwa in terms of what their primary goals are going to be, which is calling Mandani names and talking about crime. Like what else? What else is even to that strategy?
I think that though the powerful moneyed interests will end up aligning behind either Adams or Cuomo. Adams has Trump on his side, but Cuomo has a bunch of unions on his side. Like he
The question is, are they going to stay there? Like that's going to be actually really fascinating to
yeah.
find out. Are the unions who lined up with Cuomo really for political expediency? They thought he was a shoe-in, and Cuomo is known as very vindictive. And they got in with him early so that they could, win their contracts or whatever they need from the mayor in the future. And then he lost. And I got to tell you, I mean, maybe the money will line up with one or the other, but if they're both still in the race, they're cannibalizing each other's vote share. And that is helpful for Mamdani. And the question is, these unions that now, they ran a Democratic candidate, they aligned with a Democratic candidate in the Democratic primary, and he lost. Are they going to stick with him when he's not running as a Democrat, or are they going to back the Democratic nominee? I think it's a very important question and a threshold question
Mhm.
for some of these unions. That's something I'm looking at really closely. Because do they really want to align with the forces of capital? I don't know.
It looks like there is a question.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
Zoran was most
This is
successful.
from Cool Fresh.
Um, Zoran was most successful with the 50,000 to 100,000 folks who can pay bills but are facing precarity crowd. Any
Yeah.
ideas about what accounts for his disconnection from the poorest and how he can rectify? I think that's a good question. And I think, one of the things that a canvasser pointed out to me was that her impression is that, the people in New York who are struggling, who have multiple jobs, who have kids who are, just absolutely busy trying to make ends meet,
Mhm.
um, might feel very comforted by Cuomo's um, longevity, by the fact that he was on their TVs all through the height of the COVID pandemic. And
Mhm.
her explanation, because I asked a similar question of her, was that he's a known quantity and he doesn't
Right.
have crazy ideas they've never heard of before. He's just a very known quantity that they can vote for and feel comfortable doing it without feeling
Yeah, I
taking a risk.
think, I think you kind of get into some divides within the Democratic Party when you talk about this. I mean, Cuomo was basically trying to recreate Eric Adams' base, and that was, if you look at his vote by class, it's a U shape.
Mhm.
So Cuomo got support from the very poor and the very, very rich, and the rest that kind of goes down. Um, and that was also Adams' base. It was developers and African Americans who historically are on the lower end of the vote share, and certain ethnic communities for Cuomo and Adams. It was the Hasidic community in particular was very strongly Adams and was very strongly Cuomo in the election. So I think that accounts for, I don't think it's a disconnection. I think, like you say, it's a comfort level. It's a group of people who are, although this didn't happen in other parts of the city, like, the Asian American vote in Grace Meng's district, for example, went very strongly Mamdani. Mamdani won Hakeem Jeffries district, which is in parts of Brooklyn that aren't Park Slope, right? This didn't totally hold, and I think Zoran kind of held his own among the under 50,000 crowd, which isn't huge, but it is notable. In a way that allowed him to win the race, like his making inroads there actually allowed him to win. And I think that as more people get attention of him, I think that may grow. But I think that there's kind of a lot of top down, like here's who you vote for because he's always been there, kind of dynastic kind of politics that help Cuomo with that particular segment of the electorate. I don't think that's static. I don't think that's foreordained forever. And I think that Mamdani, just by continuing to do what he does, is going to gain support there. Because a lot of those guys are Democrats too, and they're going to vote for the Democrat, I think, as well. Um, yeah, I mean, we've had, I think every day Bill Ackman has a different idea of what's going to happen, whether it's, I'm going to put all this money into Adams or Cuomo, or he's going to find somebody else. I don't know. The editor of Vogue, she quit, so maybe she's going to be the new head. But, um, you know, I think this money might have diminishing returns, frankly, because first of all, Zoran already beat big money in the primary. I was in New York over the weekend, and I was in a hotel and breakfast at the hotel. The TV's playing. That was kind of the only time I saw TV then. But every ad break was just one Cuomo super PAC ad after another. Most of them playing that New York Times anti-endorsement over and over and over again, and it didn't have an effect. And I think once you sort of name the villain and say big money is trying to stop me, then there's diminishing returns to every big money ad that is out there because you've picked a fight and you've made it interesting, and so you've gotten the attention of the electorate on the downtown developer interests are the ones who are and also Trump donors are the ones who are bankrolling Cuomo's campaign. And I don't think that that's necessarily a good place to be. And the other thing, and I'll stop, is that I saw one quote from a Cuomo donor who gave like 250 grand or something. And he said, well, I gave that because I thought he was going to win. And I'm not going to give him that now because I don't think he's going to win. And so, for all this idea that there's hundreds of millions of dollars available immediately to any candidate, which kind of says that the money's available to do free buses, right? And free childcare. If they, and a moment's notice can put hundreds of millions of dollars into one candidate, it sounds like they have some extra money that they don't really need, that can be put to use on
I mean,
collective
we saw
progress.
how fast things can move during the height of COVID. Like
Absolutely.
policies that help everybody out can be enacted really quickly if
Right.
politicians
With
move.
with
But
with
David, I
yeah.
was hoping that you would talk for a minute about what you think um, Zoran's race for mayor and the way he's conducted his campaign, um, his discussion about policy.
Hmm?
What do you expect the ripple effect of that will be out through the rest of the United States? Do you think it's going to have implications for other races, or is it just New York? Is just
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to totally extrapolate from a municipal election in a very idiosyncratic city, but I do think that his message that we're going to make this place a great place to live and an affordable place to live, that is very transferable, I think, all over the country, including in national federal races. And I think this theory of politics that it's about finding things that can inspire people and then actually getting them done. I don't want to tip my hand on my print piece, but I think that's coming up for the August issue. But I think that that is not just transferable, but is actually being acted on in Washington. So I think that there are a lot of good lessons that you can learn from this. And the other thing is that the real divide right now in Democratic politics is whether you're willing to fight or not. And Zoran was on the fight side and he won. So that's very important. And also, what it shows is that Democratic voters are very uninspired by the political leaders that have been put in front of them for the last 20 or 30 years. They don't want the same old politics. When you see Mandani giving a speech or in one of these viral videos, everybody else in politics looks just worn out, like yesterday's news. And Democrats want to be inspired again. We've had three straight elections where it was, Hillary Clinton who thought it was her turn. I'm being a little simplistic here, but Joe Biden, who kind of thought it was his turn and was, sort of last hope for democracy in America, and a hastily arranged Kamala Harris, who was just kind of there because she was the vice president, and it would be impossible to overturn her in that election after Biden tried to hold on, and we're nearing the first anniversary of that. It just happened this week of that debate. And so three in a row where I don't think people were inspired too much by these candidates. They were just hopeful that they would beat Donald Trump, frankly. And that moment, I think, in Democratic politics is over. And if you keep throwing the same kind of thin gruel of an Andrew Cuomo at the electorate, they're going to reject it over and over and over again. So you ask me, is this going to change anything among the Democratic establishment? It better damn well, because otherwise they're going to be out of jobs.
Mhm.
All right.
Hard
We have
agree.
about we have about 20 minutes.
And I want to talk about the other thing that is the big message and the big thing happening in American politics right now, and that is and I hate to dignify it with this response, but it's the one big beautiful bill.
It's the Big Beautiful Bill Act.
The big beautiful, it's the OBBBA. Yes, that is correct.
The Bill Act.
The Bill Act. Yes. Uh, we are nearing a kind of moment of decision here on this bill. So the story so far is the House barely passed the bill by, I think, a vote, and sent it over to the Senate. The Senate made many, many changes to many different parts of the bill. Then they had to get it through the parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough, who is the reason is that the Senate has the option of the filibuster unless they go through this process called budget reconciliation. And budget reconciliation means that everything in the bill, as long as it has a budgetary focus, it can be done through this special process with just 50 votes. So, the Senate can vote on anything it wants to, but the other side, people who oppose it can put a 60 vote filibuster threshold on that piece of legislation. It gets the 50 if it is in the course of this bill and it has a primary budgetary purpose. So in other words, it could have a budgetary purpose, like it could be a thing that cuts spending by $2 billion or whatever. But if it's really intended to be policy to stop consumer protection or end renewable energy, then the parliamentarian can say, no, that's actually policy. That's not really budgetary, and I'm going to kick this out of the bill.
And as you pointed out on the majority report, that determination is made after a debate. And I think you
That's
said
right.
that debate should be televised or at least
I would love it.
reported.
I mean, I
Uh,
would be the only one watching, but I would love that debate to be televised.
but it seems like some of the things that have made it through that process, um, I like why. I would love
Yeah.
to
I mean,
know
there
the
are there
reasoning.
there have been some puzzling things, but let's say that the Democratic staff, what happens in this debate is that the Democratic staff and the Republican staff make their arguments almost like a trial for each provision that the Democrats challenge, and then the parliamentarian makes a decision based on this debate. And the Democratic staff has done a pretty good job. They've gotten a lot of things out of this bill. Now, Republicans have then rewritten some of these things and through negotiation with the parliamentarian, gotten her to sign off on a couple of things. So one example is uh, Republicans in the bill had zeroed out funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the parliamentarian said, no, you're just trying to get rid of the CFPB. I'm throwing that out. So the Republicans came back and said, okay, what if we just cut their budget in half? What if we just say there's a cap, there's an existing cap on how much money the Federal Reserve is allowed to forward over to the CFPB because that's how it's funded. What if we just cut that from 12% to 6.5%? And the parliamentarian said, okay, I'll let you do that. So there's this back and forth that happens between the parties and the parliamentarian, and that's been true of a couple other pieces as well. But some of them they just tossed out, and the Republicans didn't try to rewrite them because it would be impossible to do so, and so they just lose them. They're just not in the bill anymore, and a lot of those things were things that saved money. So this is the important point, right? So according to a guy at the Center for American Progress who's been following this, one of their top budget guys, the parliamentarian had thrown out $587 billion in spending cuts over a 10-year period. Um, and according to this guy, about 250 billion of that was unrecoverable. Like the Republicans, there was no way to rewrite it to get the parliamentarian sign off on 250 billion of that. Why is this important? This is important because you have House and in the Senate as well, budget hawks who have said, we don't want this thing to cost money. We don't want to spend a lot of money. We'll extend the tax cuts, but we need to offset at least most of this with spending. And now a lot of that spending is being kicked out.
Mhm.
And so the question is, well, are they going to pass the bill now that it has more tax cuts than spending cuts? And can they find anything to make up for these losses. And my view is if they had something that was acceptable to everybody, they would have put it in the bill in the first place, right? So I don't know that there are any more spending cuts that they can just pull out of thin air.
One of the things that someone said to me yesterday was that she expects they won't pull out anything from thin air. They'll just make the existing cuts that are already in the bill worse. So they will just try to
They could
cut
do
more
that.
deeply.
They
Do you
could do
think
that.
what's the process there if someone wants to try to do
Well,
that?
this is a very last minute thing, right? Because the other thing we should say is that Donald Trump and the GOP leadership in both chambers has said they want this bill done by July 4th. That is a week from today. That is 1 week from today. And we're talking about rewriting entire parts of the bill. And all of that has to be not only vetted by the parliamentarians so that the parliamentarian signs off, but it has to be acceptable to 50 members of the Senate and 218 members of the House. And that's the bigger problem. That will the deficit hawks sign off on something like that? Will there be 50 votes in the Senate for something like that? And I'll give you an example. One of the things that has been a big back and forth in this is something called the state and local tax deduction, or SALT. And what it is that if you pay a lot of state and local taxes, you can write that off on your taxes. It used to be unlimited. All the state and local taxes that you pay, you don't have to pay. You can deduct that from your federal taxes. That used to be the rule. And in 2017, in the Trump tax cuts, they capped that deduction at $10,000. And a lot of House Republicans from high tax states like California, New York, New Jersey said, that's unfair. You're punishing blue states. You're punishing my constituents, wealthy people. This is a very regressive tax cut, this deduction, because it's only for people who itemize. So if you don't make enough money or if you don't to itemize, then you're not using this. So it's really only for rich people. So they said, no, we want to raise that cap to 40,000. And that's what the House bill said. Well, you get to the Senate, and there's nobody from New York, New Jersey, or California that's a Republican senator. So there's no protection for it. So they said, no, let's take that back down to 10 billion because it's super expensive. Just
Mhm.
to go from the $10,000 cap to the $40,000 cap, that was $375 billion over 10 years. And they're looking for savings, right? So they want to the Senate wants to get rid of that. Well, the House caucus, the SALT caucus, which is 5 people, enough to kill the bill, has said, no, we're not changing anything. So there have been these back and forth talks. And what the Senate hit on as a solution was, okay, we will raise the cap to 40,000, but only for 5 years.
Mhm.
So it looks cheaper, it spends less money, but it means that it goes away after a while.
Mhm.
Well, they had apparently made this deal, which presumes that the House and Senate had signed off on the deal, the main stakeholders. But then this one guy from New York, Nick LaLota, who's a congressman, said, I'm a no on the bill now because you did that. So it's like every time you try to change something, you might lose somebody on one side or the other. And it's not just SALT, but there are like 20 different provisions that are like this. So, until they find this magic formula to balance everything, it's going to be difficult to find the solution. And the thing that you and I wrote about yesterday, or actually it came out today, is that yesterday there was a really big thing that was tossed out by the parliamentarians. So tell us about that.
Oh, I was going to ask you the exact same question. The thing I
You're
think,
on.
oh crap. The parliamentarian tossed out a thing that would have basically messed with the way that states receive Medicaid funding. And it would have made it so that they can't tax providers like hospitals, clinics, the way that they used to. The way they used to do it is, and David, please correct me if I get this wrong, they would tax the hospital a certain amount. And then that hospital would be reimbursed through Medicaid from the federal government. So the hospital ends up with the same amount of money that it did before. And it's avenue for the state to just get more federal funding. Now that amount,
It's
is that
so
right?
it's very convoluted provider tax, but that's basically right.
Yes.
That's basically right. It's they're taxing the provider, they're giving the provider back all that money to hold them harmless, basically. But not all that money is coming from the state. Some of it is coming from the federal government, and therefore it allows the state to get more federal resources for their Medicaid program. That's generally the upshot of it. Is this a clunky way to do things? Yes. Is it kind of sneaky that they're doing this recycling of money so that they can get more federal dollars in? Yes. But it's compensating for the fact that a lot of states couldn't afford Medicaid if they didn't do this.
Mhm.
So, in the context of this bill, it's just cutting Medicaid. I mean, you can call it we're like stopping this money laundering. I think that's what some Republican senators have called it. You can say whatever you want, but in the context of this bill, you're just cutting Medicaid. If you're not giving more resources so that states will be starved, won't be starved and have to cut funding for Medicaid, then you're just making a cut. And so here's what happened. The parliamentarian took that out of the bill, said, no, this is for a variety of reasons, but she said it wasn't primarily budgetary in purpose. It was a policy decision to change Medicaid, essentially. And so this was a huge point of contention, and it's also hundreds of billions of dollars in savings in the bill. We don't even know because the Senate used a different version of this than the House. It was about 80 billion in the House, but it was going to be much, much more in the Senate version because they actually the House froze provider tax rates at the current level.
And then the Senate came in and lowered
He
them.
said you actually have to take those down. So
Yeah.
it's not like you can't raise these anymore. You actually get less.
And I
And
think that
yeah.
the one of the important things I think about that proposal was, like a lot of things in this terrible bill,
Mhm.
is it would have taken place over time. So the cut to the amount states could tax their providers would be incremental until, I think, I don't want to say the wrong year, but it would be something like 5 years out or so.
Yeah, they
Um,
were stepping it down by
yeah.
0.4% a year.
And, I think so when we hear like Mitch McConnell say, well, if people are just going to forget about this, it's not that
We'll
big of a
get
deal.
over it. Yeah.
What he's banking on is that they'll pass this bill, the sky won't immediately fall, and the consequences of it will be felt years from now, and folks won't be, they won't maybe remember what happened. They won't remember whose fault it is.
Right.
Um, but these cuts to our healthcare, just our access to modern medicine in this country,
Right.
are going to kill people. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, like, okay, so this thing came out of the bill, it got birded out. Um, so is everything all good now?
They're trying to now have a negotiation with the parliamentarian to do, get a different version of the provider tax back into the bill. So that's number one.
Mhm.
Number two, it's actually kind of funny to me that we're spending all this time on just the provider tax because there's like close to $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts here. And if you look at provider tax is important, but it's like 1/10 of what was in the House version of the bill in terms of Medicaid cuts. And the other 9/10 we're not talking about. But everyone fixated on the provider tax and said, oh, this is going to kill my rural hospitals in my state. And the Senate came out and said, okay, the leadership said, well, we'll fix this for you. We'll give you a $15 billion rural hospital fund to make up for $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. This is it's not even a Band-Aid. It's like an edge of a paper towel.
Yeah, you said the edge of a paper
Yeah,
towel
I mean
on a
it's
gaping
insane.
wound.
It's just ridiculous.
I
Um,
think you also said it was insulting, and I think that
yeah,
that is really true. Like, the there's contempt for human life in this bill, but there's also just contempt for our understanding of the way things work,
Well, and it's
and numeracy.
and it's contempt for elected officials who've been
Mhm.
talking about this because they fully expect all of these Republicans who are talking about this position or that in the bill to get in line with Donald Trump at the end of the day. And frankly, I've seen nothing to suggest that they won't at this point. I mean, there's been a lot of whining back and forth, people saying they're not voting for the bill, people saying if you bring that back with those cuts in, I'm not going to vote for it. There's a lot of posturing going on, but there hasn't been the moment where a Josh Hawley or a Bill Cassidy or a Susan Collins or a Lisa Murkowski would actually take a stand and vote against the bill. And
No, they talk about it as if Trump is the only one who always chickens out, but that's a problem across the
it's
entire
Srocco to
party.
the Senate Republicans always chicken out.
Yeah.
And so we're going to get a test of this because, according to, Senate sources I know, the claim is that there aren't 50 votes for this bill, but we're probably going to find out once they put it together. And that could be as soon as this weekend. There
Mhm.
could be votes, at least the beginnings of votes. Because the only way to make this timeline of being done by next Friday is you got to hold the votes this weekend to get it done.
What
And
happens if they miss
the
that timeline?
what
I mean, is the deadline, what happens if they miss the deadline? Do they just instantly die?
here's the reason they want to stick to the deadline. This bill gets less popular every day that it's out there. And the normal process, if you had this much thrown out by the parliamentarian, and it's like 3 dozen provisions that have been thrown out. The normal process is you would do this negotiation, but you would do it very step by step. You try to get as much back in as you can, and that back and forth process would take weeks. They can't do that because they're adhering to this deadline. And the reason they're adhering to this deadline is they don't want the bill to become so unpopular that maybe a Republican sees political value in voting against it. And so they're desperately trying to pass the bill, ram it through before the politics catches up with the bill.
Mhm.
And they've been aided in that front by a lot of distractions, as Trump likes to do, right? I mean, we've had the a war strike on Iran, and we've had immigrants being snatched off the streets on a daily basis, and there are just all these, and even Mandani, like there are all these other things in the news competing for attention, and they want to keep this under the radar. They because anytime people hear about it, they hate it. And particularly Republicans, if you tell them that actually what they're doing is they're cutting a bunch of Medicaid and they're cutting your food and your medicine, and they're using that money to finance tax cuts for the rich, they hate that. They hate that idea. Republicans too. And so they don't want anyone to know about this.
Mhm.
And that's why they're going to try to pass it on a weekend before a holiday week. The other part of why the timeline is where it is and why they want to hit July 4th is that there's this thing called the debt limit. And the debt limit is the nation's borrowing limitation. There's a cap on how much the US government can borrow. And if they hit that cap, they can't borrow money anymore, which means makes it almost impossible to finance certain operations. And the estimates from the Treasury Department is that that will start to hit maybe as soon as mid-July or certainly by August. And so there is a $5 trillion debt limit increase in this bill. And so they want to get that done before the debt limit becomes a conversation, because if they can't pass this bill and they have to do something on the debt limit, then they have to negotiate with Democrats on it. And Democrats can get something out of it. So that is another kind of, that has created another sense of urgency around this bill. All right, we are just about out of time. I would advise people to keep paying attention over the weekend because we could see real changes that will affect every American come into play here if the Senate moves forward. I'm not sure they can, but you know, uh, they got to show me that they're willing to buck the president, right? So, Whitney Wimbish, staff writer for the American Prospect, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was great.
And we do this every Friday at 12:30. We'll also put video of this conversation up on our website. You can visit that at prospect.org. We're also going to start clipping these up and putting them on our TikTok page, which we actually have. So find the American Prospect at TikTok if you and send this around. It's at American Prospect on TikTok. So. And thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care.